With your permission, Mom, Daddy. This evening, thanks to Jewish Community Watch, we will learn of some of the ramifications of when child sexual abuse is dismissed and swept under the rug. And yes, that happens. I know the subject matter is not pretty and it's not glamorous. Many of you are already squirming in your seats. I understand. I ask you to join me for a moment, blush for a few moments, so that others don't have to bleed. To our rabbinic leaders that are here tonight, thank you. Thank you for being here. In recent years through JCW, we've heard from many brave survivors. Rivka, you're a hero. They talk about the healing that occurs when they share their stories, and yes, they blush. We also hear from professionals, from law enforcement, from psychologists, and all are vital to the healing process. It is rare, it is extraordinary that we hear from parents of survivors. Seriously, to have that kind of koach, to share their story, they blush. We know that child sexual abuse affects the entire family. Ruth, you set the tone in our families, and I am beyond proud of your strength, your courage, and your willingness to speak for those who cannot. Ladies and gentlemen, I am incredibly humbled to introduce to you probably one of the most brave and courageous mamas that you might ever meet, my sister, Ruth Gordon.
I would like to thank you all for being here tonight and allowing me to share my family's story. Special thanks to Mimi and Hadassah for having the courage to put this program together in Pittsburgh. A huge thank you goes to Mayor Ellie and the JCW organization for your relentless devotion to victims and survivors. And lastly, I would like to say thank you to my son, David Menachem Ben Yaakov Leib, Alav HaShalom, for being my hero and for teaching me what it's like to transition from being a victim to being a survivor, and to have the guts to stand up here tonight publicly and speak about it. May his neshama have an aliyah. I suspected that tonight would be difficult for me. Speaking about sexual abuse, a subject that is creepy, uncomfortable, terrifically embarrassing, is one thing. But to do it in front of a hometown crowd is very humbling. I am by no means a public speaker, but I do have things that I would like to share with you tonight. It is not my intention to go into any graphic details or to make any huge revelations. It's my hope that we can learn something together tonight that will help us all, especially our children. Let's begin by dispelling the notion that it can't happen here or not in my family. It can, and it does. If you really believed that it couldn't, this room would be empty right now. I would also like to preface my remarks by saying that none of the instances of abuse that happened to my son happened here. Not that it matters, because it can happen and does happen anywhere. My son was sexually abused from age 9 to age 11 by 4 older teenage boys. These boys came from upstanding religious homes. His abuse took place in the JCC, on the school grounds, and in the Colo, all places deemed to be safe havens by both parents and children. Our son kept his abuse hidden for 7 years until he blurted it out to a therapist and subsequently to us, his parents, right before his 16th birthday. I'm a social worker by training and have seen my share of self-destructive behaviors on the part of clients. All the training that I had could never have prepared me for what my son and my whole family would endure. We sought advice from Das Torah, religious community leaders who we knew, respected, and above all, trusted. We were hurt, angry, and very, very confused. And we, as a family, were embarrassed and shunned by the very leaders we came to trust. Nobody wanted to deal with this subject. Nobody wanted to tell us what to do. Nobody gave it any advice. We as a family felt very isolated and abandoned. To say that we were disappointed in the system would be an understatement. Our son felt re-victimized, and we felt we had no choice but to go for support outside of our community. Our first stop, the local police. I would like to say out loud, publicly, that anyone who chooses to protect a perp and his family from embarrassment and shame, by definition, you are bringing that very shame and embarrassment to a victim and their family. As is common with people who have undergone a trauma, our son turned to drugs to try to get rid of his pain. Thankfully, we sought and found help, and our son got the therapy he so desperately needed. I was amazed that right here in Pittsburgh, there is a program through Allegheny General Hospital that specializes in therapy for childhood trauma. They have patients from age 2 to age 18. Fortunately or unfortunately, the waiting room was always full. I can remember telling the therapist one day, that I prayed regularly that she would be out of a job. But don't take it too personally. She told me she understood, but in reality, we both knew that she would always have a full-time job. In addition to therapy, our son started attending Narcotics Anonymous groups, beginning on his 16th birthday. Our vocabulary went from Mishnayos and Gemara to NA, PTSD, and CSA overnight. I wrote the following after dropping David off at an NA meeting one day in July, 2 months after we found out about his abuse. As I reread it today, some 6.5 years later, it's an interesting summary of how I was feeling as a parent. David tells me he wants to leave early for his NA meeting because he will be speaking to the group. He seems both nervous and excited at the same time. As we pull up to the church where the NA meetings are held, a very large black man is waiting for David with a big smile and an even bigger hug. In my mind, he's affectionately known as Bubba. David looked so small and so young in comparison to his newfound brothers and sisters. I pull away, actually feeling secure, knowing that at least for the next hour, David will be safe. As I drive home, it suddenly hits me. My son has found a new chevra. He spends at least 1 hour a day, 7 days a week, with men and women of all shapes and sizes, ages and color. He's one of them, and he's showered with unconditional love and support. I found myself having to pull over on the side of the road because I couldn't see through my tears. I was reminded that David is also part of another group, another chevra. This other chevra has not offered him hugs, unconditional love, or support. This other chevra has offered scorn, rebuke, and rejection. It's almost comical that David is getting love and support at a church while he is turned away by his shul, school, and his rebbeim, his first chevra. Comical, but not really. It's also not lost on me that these meetings usually take place around the same time as Minyan. I never had to remind David to go to an NA meeting, but I can't remember the last time David wanted to attend a Minyan. If only someone from his chevra would have offered hugs, an outlet for speaking and listening, and unconditional love, I would not have to be driving my 16-year-old little boy for support elsewhere. If only the genuine warmth shown to David by Bubba could have been shown by any one of his rebbeim. If only 2 small words that continue to haunt me and consume my thoughts. No time to dwell on the if only. Time to pick up my son, who will most likely be inspired and empowered by his new chevra. And for that, I'm very grateful. That was very difficult to write, difficult to read, and even more difficult to hear. I will say that I do have a tremendous hakaras hatov, gratitude, to the teachers and rebbeim who tried to connect with David and did offer love and support, some of whom are in this room tonight. I offer you my profound thanks and gratitude on behalf of my family. With proper support, our son grew stronger and healthier, and although there were many more bumps in the road, he was beginning to transition from a victim to a survivor. He knew he had his parents on his side and told us numerous times how much that meant to him. At some point, even through his anger, something clicked. While he wasn't cured, he began living a healthier lifestyle. He went to yeshiva and found rebbeim who listened to him while he asked his never-ending questions. They loved him for who he was, and he was happy, guarded, but happy. It was no surprise to us when David announced that he wanted to make Aliyah and ultimately join the IDF. He volunteered in Israel for an organization just like this one to help victims and protect children. In 2013, David wrote his story in the Huffington Post entitled, "Secrets Don't Get Better with Age, Why I'm Choosing Leadership Over Secrecy." He blew it out of the water. He was able to take his pain and reach others through his writing. His numerous blogs have been read by thousands all over the world. The veil of shame he carried around for over 10 years was finally being lifted. The response was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. His extended family, some only learning of his abuse through this article, was so proud. He heard from other victims, parents of victims, random people, many of whom he did not know, who thanked him for his courage to write the article. Interestingly enough, he received several letters and phone calls from some of his former teachers and rebbeim who asked for mechila, for forgiveness. Several said they suspected abuse, but they did not act on it. Nobody accused him of making it up. Nobody accused him of lying. They knew. "Blush for a few moments so others won't have to bleed" became his rallying cry. He gave us and himself permission to share his story, to face the fears and embarrassment in order to save others from the same feelings. In August 2014, while we were in Israel sitting Shiva for our beloved son, who was killed during Operation Protective Edge, numerous people shared their stories with us. One young man in particular had touched our hearts. He was overcome with grief and kept telling us how David saved his life. He informed us that he too was a victim of sexual abuse and kept it hidden. He was despondent, suicidal, and he was unable to discuss this with his parents. He was in pain and felt very much alone. He was moved by David's Huffington Post article and made contact with him. It was then that he was able to finally share his story. At David's urging, he sought and received professional help and was able to finally tell his parents what had happened to him. The day we were scheduled to leave Israel and return to the States, this young man was scheduled to begin his tour of duty in the IDF. As is very common, the night before a soldier enters into the Army, he is benched by his parents. He's given a blessing. Since he was a lone soldier, he didn't have anybody to bench him. So we did. We were comforted and very proud to see that David had used his pain and his experience to pay it forward. Another incident occurred Motzei Shabbos during Shiva in Jerusalem. After a very long and grueling evening, we were joined by about 20 young men, most of them in the IDF, all friends of our son. It was after midnight. I was physically and mentally exhausted and really just wanted to go back to my hotel room and go to sleep. I couldn't leave. I witnessed something that in part is why I'm here tonight. 20 young men, all from homes between the ages of 18 and 22, were eating, crying, and talking together. Of those 20 young men, 8 admitted to some form of sexual abuse. That's a staggering number, heartbreaking, and totally unacceptable. It became very clear that these boys were speaking to us because they were afraid to speak to their parents. I have remained in contact with many of these young men. I listen to them. I support them. I cry with them. And most of all, I daven for them every single day. Last month, I had the great pleasure of going to Miami to participate in the JCW's first annual gala event. While I admit it was great being in Miami in January, when the temperature in Columbus was hovering around 0, that was not the highlight of my trip. In a ballroom filled to capacity, I had one of those moments that's kind of difficult to describe, but had a tremendous impact on me. In the center of the room, there were 2 large tables filled with family members of Mayor Seawald and Ellie Nash, 2 of our speakers tonight, and the true heart and soul of JCW. Now, this may not seem like a big deal, but seeing these 2 survivors surrounded and supported by their loving families was so opposite of most of the victims I've had contact with. To me, it was a remarkable scene. It was a reminder and validation for me that family members of victims are also victims. We just sometimes get overlooked in the chaos. Parents, allow me to share some things that I have learned. Without overstating the obvious, please pay attention to your children. If you see changes in your kids or you feel the red flag waving, act on your feelings. Don't be afraid or embarrassed to reach out and ask for help. And you better be persistent until you get it. Watch your children. Know where they are and who they are with. There are no places that are out of bounds for predators. And predators are often people our kids know and trust. Children need to be supervised. And at the risk of ruffling a few feathers in this room, this includes the shul. Unless there's a specific program set up in your shul for babysitting or youth minyan, your child should be with you in shul or with you at home. Talk to your children and listen to your children, even if it's uncomfortable. Develop and maintain a solid communication with your kids so they won't be afraid to come to you if something is wrong. I can't tell you how many young men I have spoken to who are hiding their pain from their parents out of fear. Fear they will not be heard, fear they will not be believed, and fear they will be shut out by their parents or their community. I want to end by making an interesting observation. Tomorrow night is Purim Katan, a mini Purim, if you will. The story of Purim is based on things that are hidden and things that are revealed. When things were hidden, things really didn't work out very well for the Jewish people. Things improved, and the true miracle of Purim occurred when the things that were hidden were finally revealed. It is my fervent prayer that in the case of childhood sexual abuse, we as a community will stop keeping things hidden. Then we can look forward to good things together as a people when things are revealed. At the end of the day, we all have to blush for a few moments so others don't have to bleed.